The rain came down like judgment, cold, hard, turning the whole world to mud. Harlan Grady was tying off his horse when he saw her, a ghost in the storm, bareheaded, soaked to the bone, clutching a little bundle to her chest. She was stumbling, lost, right on the edge of the road where the mud was deepest. He stepped off the feed store porch and his boots sank. "Ma'am," he said. She whipped around, her eyes wide, wild. Fear, pure, uncut fear. Her dress was ripped, heavy with rain, her hair a mess of wet strands stuck to her face. The baby in her arms let out a tiny, miserable sound, almost swallowed by the thunder. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Harlan said, keeping his hands where she could see them. Her lips trembled. She looked past him, at the dark windows of the town, then back at his face. "I just need somewhere dry." "I got a place," he said, "up the ridge, just me." Her eyes darted over him, searching for the lie, the trap. He saw the exhaustion under the fear, the kind that comes when you've been holding on for too long. "Name's Harlan Grady," he said. "You and the baby can come with me. Just for the night." She took a breath. Then she gave one sharp nod. He led her to his horse. "You ride, I'll walk." She didn't argue. She just climbed up, her hands shaking on the saddle horn as she held that baby tight. Harlan took the reins and started walking, up the trail, into the pines, with the cold rain soaking through his coat right down to the bone. The cabin was small, rough, but it was solid, tucked between two ridges, sheltered by the trees. He pushed the door open, the smell of cold ash and damp wood hitting them. He lit the oil lamp, the little flame pushing back the shadows. The fire was long dead. He helped her down from the horse, his hand steady on her arm, and guided her inside. She moved like a sleepwalker, like she wasn't sure the floor was real. "Sit there," he said, pointing to a rocker by the hearth. "I'll get the fire going." She sank into the chair, the baby still pressed to her chest. Harlan worked fast. Kindling, logs, the scrape of a match. The flame caught, and the fire crackled, spitting and hissing as it came to life. For the first time, the woman spoke above a whisper. Her voice was quiet, hoarse. "Name's Willa," she said. Harlan looked up from the fire, the orange light flickering across his face. "That your boy?" She nodded, her hand gently brushing wet curls from the baby's forehead. "Tobias. He's 9 months." Harlan stood, taking off his heavy coat and draping it over a chair. "You hungry?" "Yes," she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "But only if there's enough." "There's always enough," he said. He moved around the small space, pulling down a tin of beans, a wrapped loaf of cornbread. She watched his every move, her eyes wide, like she expected him to vanish into thin air. He handed her a plate. She took it with a whispered thanks. Tobias had finally stopped whimpering. He was dozing against her chest, little puffs of breath against her wet dress. "You from around here?" Harlan asked, taking a seat at the simple wooden table. Willa stared into the new fire, her face half in shadow. "No, Idaho." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "My husband, he died 3 weeks ago. Fever." She told him they were on their way to his brother's ranch near Billings, but she never made it. "Tried to hire a wagon in town this morning," she said, her eyes still on the flames. "No one would take me. Said the trail was washed out, then the storm hit." Harlan leaned forward, his hands on the table. "You walked out in this? With a baby?" She finally looked at him, a flash of something hard in her eyes. "Couldn't stay. The man at the boarding house. He told me to go. Said he didn't rent rooms to widows with crying babies." Harlan felt a knot tighten in his gut. He looked back at the fire, his jaw set. After a long minute, he spoke. "You can stay here." Her head snapped up. "As long as you need." Her eyes were glistening now, but it wasn't just the rain. "Why? You don't even know me." "You look like you were about to break in half," he said. his voice low and even. "And no one should be out in that storm with a child." She blinked, fast, and looked down at Tobias, hiding her face. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't have to," he said. "Just rest." She didn't speak again. Harlan laid a blanket near the fire for her and another for the baby. He took the corner by the door for himself, rolling out his bedroll without a word. All night the storm raged outside, beating on the roof. But inside the cabin it was warm. It was dry. And for the first time it wasn't completely silent. But Harlan lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness. Her story was clean. Too clean. It fit together perfectly, like a well-made box. And Harlan knew, better than most, that life was never that neat. Something was wrong. The morning was quiet. The world outside was scrubbed clean, the sky a pale, clear blue. The first light was touching the tops of the pines when Willa stirred. Harlan was already up, feeding the fire, the smell of coffee hanging in the air. She sat up slowly, blinking in the sudden brightness. Tobias was still asleep beside her, wrapped snugly in a quilt. "Coffee," she said, her voice rough. He handed her a tin cup. "Hope you like it bitter." A small, faint smile touched her lips. "I don't remember the last time I had hot coffee." He let the silence sit for a moment before he asked, "You planning to head on to Billings?" She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, staring down into it. "I was. I don't know now. No wagon. No money left." "You could stay," he said again, slower this time, "until the trails are better, or longer. Cabin's mine, but I don't use half of it." She looked up, really looked at him, her eyes searching his. "You sure?" He gave a single, solid nod. "I don't talk much and I work long days, but you'd be safe here." She studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. "All right." That first day passed in a quiet rhythm. Tobias, warm and dry, started to smile again, his tiny hand reaching out to grab Harlan's finger whenever he passed. Willa washed their clothes by the creek, the cold water turning her hands red, and Harlan patched the spot on the roof where the rain had found a way in. They ate dinner at the little table, the silence comfortable. When the fire burned low that night, Willa looked at him across the warm glow. "Thank you," she said. "For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." He just nodded, his gaze steady. "You don't owe me anything." But the way she looked at him then, her eyes soft, still guarded but with a flicker of something new, something curious, it felt like the start of something. That night, she slept by the hearth again, Tobias curled beside her, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. Harlan sat by the window long after she was asleep, watching the stars prick the black sky, one by one. He wondered what it meant, finding someone like her in a storm. He wondered if she was the reason he'd stopped living alone. But as he watched her sleep, a different thought crept in, cold and sharp. Her story about the boarding house owner. It didn't sit right. He knew the man, old Silas Croft. Croft was greedy, but he wasn't cruel. He'd never turn a widow with a baby out into a storm. Not for any price. Willa was lying. He was sure of it now. The only question was why. By the third day, the world smelled of pine and damp earth. Harlan came back from the fence line, his sleeves rolled up, and saw her out behind the cabin. She was kneeling by the little garden patch, pulling up stubborn roots. Tobias was in a basket beside her, shaded by a piece of canvas. Harlan stopped by the door, just watching. She was wearing one of his old shirts, the sleeves rolled past her elbows. She looked up, as if she could feel his eyes on her. "You got carrots hiding under all this?" he asked, walking closer. "Not yet," she said, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Mostly stones. But it'll take seed if the nights stay warm." "Hadn't thought to plant this fall," he said. "Figured the ground wasn't ready." "It isn't," she said, resting back on her heels. "But working it." Helps me think. He crouched down beside her, brushing a bit of dirt from Tobias's cheek with the back of his finger. He sleep all right? Better here than anywhere else. They were quiet for a minute. The wind in the pines, the baby stirring in his sleep. I could dig out that patch near the shed tomorrow, Harlan said. Might get some greens in before the freeze. If you don't mind me using the space. Wouldn't have offered if I did. She looked at him then, her voice quiet. Do you ever get tired of the silence? He tilted his head. You mean the quiet out here? I mean the kind that follows you, even when someone's sitting right beside you. Harlan didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the sharp line of the trees against the sky. Used to think something was wrong with me, like I'd forgotten how to talk. But it's not the quiet that wears on me. It's having to pretend I don't need it. Her expression was strange, a kind of sad tenderness. You don't talk like a man who's been alone too long. Maybe I've just had too much time to think, he said. She gave a small, sad smile. My husband. He used to fill up a room just by walking into it. Always had something to say, even when there was nothing worth saying. His name was Robert, she'd said. Robert Bennett. Harlan didn't press. He just picked up the spade and started breaking up the earth beside her. They worked side by side until Tobias started fussing. I'll take him in, she said. Harlan stood and offered her a hand up. She hesitated for just a second, then took it. Her fingers were rough, her palm fitting against his like it belonged there. She let go quickly, but something passed between them. That evening, after a dinner of boiled beans, she stood by the hearth. I don't expect anything from you, she said, her fingers twisting together. But I want to earn my place. I don't want to be a burden. You aren't, he said. You're just here, same as me. That's enough. She looked at the fire, her cheeks flushed. If I were to stay, longer than the first thaw, he stood up, keeping a few feet between them. Then I'd be glad for it. A little bit of the tension left her shoulders. I'm not sure what I'm ready for. I'm not in a hurry, he said, and I don't mind waiting. She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time. You're not like anyone I've known. Don't aim to be. She said goodnight and disappeared into the back room. Harlan stood by the fire, letting the warmth soak in. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt lived in. But another piece of her story clicked into place in his mind, and it felt like a key turning in a lock he didn't know was there. She said her husband was a talker, filled a room. But she also said they were headed to his brother's ranch near Billings. Harlan knew that country. He knew most of the families that ranched it. And he'd never heard of any rancher named Bennett. Not in his whole life. The lies were starting to pile up, and they were getting dangerous. The first frost came early, rimming the pine needles with white. Harlan went out before sunup, the chop of his axe the only sound in the cold, gray light. When he came back in, Willa was at the table, a needle moving through a piece of pale muslin. I think he's cutting another tooth, she said, nodding toward the cradle. Didn't sleep more than 2 hours straight. I'll ride into town tomorrow, Harlan said, hanging his coat. Might be some clove oil left at the apothecary. We'll make do if they don't, she said, not looking up from her sewing. But her voice was quieter when she spoke again. I had a sister once. Louisa. Died birthing her second. I was 12. He dried his hands slowly on a towel. You never mentioned her. Don't speak her name much anymore, she said, tying off a thread. Mama was never the same after. She'd just sit by the window, waiting. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said, brushing a stray thread from her skirt. You don't owe me a reason. He walked over, resting a hand on the edge of the table. You're someone who keeps going. That's not nothing. Her eyes met his. The wall was gone. For the first time, he felt like he was seeing the real woman underneath, but that just made the lies sharper. That afternoon, they worked on the chicken coop together. Willa held the boards while Harlan drove the nails. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked, her shoulder braced against the frame. "Not much reason to go," he said. "No family left." She adjusted her grip. "I've got a cousin down in Nebraska. Haven't written her in years." "You thinking about it?" She paused, then shook her head. "Used to be I was always thinking about someplace else. Now I mostly just think about what needs fixing." He handed her another board. "That's how you know you've settled." After the baby was asleep that night, they sat by the fire. The wind brushed against the cabin. "I saw the way you watched him today," Willa said. "The boy. You don't look like a man who's never held a child." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My mother kept a boarding house when I was young. Always babies underfoot. Learned to swaddle a child before I learned to fire a rifle." She smiled a little. "That's not the kind of thing a man says unless he means it." "I don't say much I don't mean." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I'd like to stay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Past the thaw. Maybe longer." Harlan didn't move, but the air in the cabin shifted. "I don't want to be a guest anymore," she added. "I want to be part of it." He turned to her, his voice slow and even. "Then stay." She stood and crossed the room to him. She knelt by his chair and put her hand on his. "Not out of kindness," she said. "Not because I'm someone who needs saving." His voice was low. "I don't see you that way." Her eyes held his. "I need to be sure." "You're not here because I pitied you," he said, his voice rough. "You're here because I saw a woman with more grit than most men I've known, and I wanted her under my roof." She let out a breath she'd been holding for days. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. He didn't pull her closer. He just let her rest. After a long while, he covered her hand with his. The silence between them felt like home. But as he sat there, her head on his shoulder, his mind was racing. He was going to town tomorrow. He'd said it was for clove oil. That was a lie. He was going to the marshal's office. Because last night, staring into the fire, he'd remembered something. A story he'd heard from a traveling deputy a year back. About an outlaw gang working their way east from Idaho. A gang known for using a woman and a baby as a distraction. A gang led by a smooth talker who could fill a room just by walking into it. A man named Bennett. Harlan rode out the next morning while the sky was still the color of a bruise. He told Willa he was going for supplies, for the clove oil. He told her to keep the door bolted. He watched her face as he said it. She just nodded, her expression calm, her hand resting on Tobias's head. She was a good liar. He had to give her that. The ride to town was cold. The air bit at his face. He didn't stop at the general store. He didn't stop at the apothecary. He tied his horse right in front of the marshal's office. The building was small, little more than a shack, but the law was the law. Marshal Thompson was an old man with tired eyes and a drooping mustache. He looked up from his paperwork when Harlan walked in. "Grady," he said. It wasn't a question. "What brings you down from that ridge of yours?" Harlan didn't waste time. "You got any paper? From Idaho? Last year or so?" The marshal sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Might. What are you looking for?" "A man named Bennett, Robert Bennett, runs a gang, maybe uses a woman and a baby." Thompson's eyes narrowed. He was silent for a long moment. Then he got up, walked to a dusty cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a thick leather folio. He untied the string and started flipping through the worn pages. Wanted posters, faded drawings of hard-faced men. He stopped on one. He slid it across the desk without a word. Harlan picked it up. The drawing was rough, but it was enough. A man with dark hair and a confident smirk. Robert Smiling Rob Bennett. Wanted for armed robbery, horse theft, and the murder of 2 deputies in Boise. The reward was $500. But it was the text at the bottom that made Harlan's blood run cold. Travels with a woman, believed to be his wife, Willa Bennett. uses their infant child as a means to gain trust and access to homesteads, considered armed and extremely dangerous. Harlan stared at the poster. The pieces didn't just fit, they slammed together. The storm, the story about being kicked out of the boarding house, the non-existent brother-in-law in Billings. It was all a lie, a carefully built cage, and he had walked right into it. She wasn't a widow. She was a scout. She wasn't looking for shelter. She was looking for a target. And she'd found one, a secluded cabin, a man who lived alone, the perfect place for her husband and his gang to lay low for the winter. He felt a surge of ice-cold fury, not at her, not yet, at himself, for being a fool, for letting the quiet of his life make him soft, for wanting to believe her. He folded the poster and tucked it inside his coat. "Appreciate it, Marshal," he said, turning to leave. "Grady," Thompson called after him. "You find something? You send word. Don't go playing the hero." Harlan didn't answer. He just walked out into the cold daylight. The ride back up the ridge was different. He saw everything with new eyes, the way the trees gave cover, the clear line of sight from the woods to his front door, the vulnerability of his own home. He wasn't riding back to a woman he was starting to care for. He was riding into a trap, and he had no idea if it had been sprung yet. He wasn't sure if he was the hunter or the prey. He left the horse in the trees about 100 yards from the cabin. He moved silently, his rifle in his hand. The smoke was still rising from the chimney. That was a good sign, or a very bad one. He crept up to the side window, the one that looked into the main room. He peered through the glass. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Willa wasn't by the fire. Tobias wasn't in his cradle. For a heart-stopping second, he thought they were gone. Then he saw her. She was in the back room, the one he'd cleared out for her. Her back was to him. She was packing a small canvas bag, swiftly, efficiently. She folded one of Tobias's blankets, then one of her own shirts. Then she reached under the mattress of the small cot. When her hand came back out, it was holding a pistol, a small snub-nosed revolver. She checked the cylinder, then tucked it carefully into the waistband of her skirt, hiding it under the fabric. The blood drained from Harlan's face. It was true, all of it. He watched as she picked up the sleeping baby, settled him into a sling on her chest, and walked back into the main room. She glanced around, her eyes scanning everything. The door, the windows. She was waiting. But not for him. She was waiting for them. He backed away from the window, his mind a whirlwind. He could confront her. He could burst in, his rifle leveled. But what then? She had the baby. She would use him as a shield. He had no doubt about that now. Or he could wait. Wait for Bennett and his men to arrive. Let them walk into his own trap. It was a hell of a choice, his life against theirs. But as he stood there in the cold shadows of the pines, another thought came to him, a memory. His brother. The way he'd looked after being gunned down by outlaws, an ambush he never saw coming. Harlan had spent years running from that memory, living alone on this ridge, trying to pretend the world couldn't touch him. But it had. It had walked right up to his door in the middle of a storm, and now he had a choice to make. He wasn't just some homesteader. He wasn't just some fool who'd been tricked. He gripped his rifle. He knew what he had to do. He circled around to the back of the cabin, to the small root-cellar door that was hidden under the porch. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. He eased the wooden door open, the hinges groaning softly. He slipped inside, into the cold, dark, earthy-smelling space beneath the cabin floor. He pulled the door shut over his head, plunging himself into near-total darkness. He could hear her footsteps above him, pacing back and forth. Waiting. He settled himself in the dark, his rifle across his knees. He was waiting, too. The hours crawled by. The slivers of light coming through the floorboards above him faded from gray to black. He sat in the cold and the dark, listening to the woman above him, the soft sounds of her moving around the cabin, the baby's occasional cry quickly shushed. Every sound was a reminder of her betrayal. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to Bennett's arrival. He thought about the wanted poster, considered armed and extremely dangerous. He was one man. He had no idea how many he was facing. This wasn't just a fight, this was suicide. Then he heard it. A low whistle from the woods, the sound of a bird call but not one he recognized. It was a signal. He heard the floorboards above him creak as Willa moved to the door. He heard the soft click of the bolt being drawn back. The door opened, a man's voice, low and rough. "Took you long enough." "He just left this morning," Willa answered. Her voice was different, harder, colder. "Is it clear?" "It's clear. Just him. Lives like a hermit. Hasn't been to town in a month before today." A second man spoke. "You get a look around? Anything worth taking?" "Some canned goods, a rifle, not much else. But the place is perfect. No one will find us here." Harlan's hands tightened on his rifle. So that was it. They weren't just going to rob him. They were going to kill him and take his home. The first man stepped inside. Harlan could hear his heavy boots on the floorboards. "Where is he now?" "He rode into town for supplies," Willa said. "Should be back any time." The man laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. "Well, we'll have a nice surprise waiting for him when he gets home. Get the boy." We moved the horses into the barn. Harlan knew this was it. This was his only chance. He took a deep breath. He shoved the root cellar door open with all his strength. It flew upwards, slamming into the floor of the cabin. He launched himself out of the darkness, his rifle already at his shoulder. The room exploded in chaos. There were two of them. One was a big, bearded man standing by the fire. The other was leaning against the door frame. Willa was standing by the table, her face a mask of shock, the baby clutched to her chest. The bearded man swore, fumbling for his gun. But Harlan was faster. His rifle roared, the sound deafening in the small cabin. The man was thrown backwards, crashing against the stone hearth. He didn't get up. The second man had his gun out. He fired wildly, the bullet splintering the wall next to Harlan's head. Harlan dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired again. The second man grunted, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the floor. And then there was silence, broken only by the baby's terrified wails. Harlan stood up slowly, his rifle trained on the wounded man. Then he turned his eyes to Willa. She was staring at the body on the floor, her face pale, her eyes wide with a horror that looked terrifyingly real. "You," she whispered. He took a step towards her. "It was all a lie." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes, but he couldn't trust them. Not anymore. "He made me," she choked out. "Bennett. He made me do it." "Where is he?" Harlan demanded, his voice like stone. The wounded man on the floor started to laugh, a wheezing, bloody sound. "He's not here, lawman." Harlan's head snapped towards him. The man grinned, blood on his teeth. "This was just the welcoming party. Rob's waiting. He wanted to see if the little bird could get the cage open first." Suddenly, Willa screamed, "Harlan, no!" He turned back to her, confused. Her eyes weren't on him. They were on the window behind him. He spun around just in time to see the glass shatter. A third man was standing outside, leveling a shotgun. But before the man could fire, before Harlan could even raise his own rifle, Willa did something he never expected. She moved. She threw herself forward, shoving the heavy wooden table with all her might. It crashed into Harlan, knocking him off his feet, sending him sprawling to the floor just as the shotgun blast tore through the space where he had been standing. Splinters and lead shot filled the air. Harlan lay on the floor, stunned, his ears ringing. He looked up at Willa. She was standing over him, her body shielding him, the baby screaming in her arms. The pistol she'd hidden was now in her hand, and it was pointed not at him, but at the broken window. "Get down!" she screamed. The game had just changed, and he had no idea what the new rules were. Harlan scrambled behind the overturned table, his mind reeling. Willa was firing her small pistol out the broken window. The shotgun blasted again, chewing up the log wall of the cabin. "There's two more out there," she yelled over the noise. "Bennett and another man, Cole." Harlan risked a glance over the edge of the table. The wounded outlaw was trying to crawl toward his dropped pistol. Harlan didn't hesitate. He fired a third time. The man went still. He looked back at Willa. She had taken cover behind the stone hearth, reloading her revolver with trembling hands. The baby was on the floor behind her, wailing. "Why?" Harlan yelled. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I'm done," she screamed back, her voice cracking. "I'm done letting him use us. I'm done running." The front door burst open. A man stood silhouetted against the night. He was holding two pistols, and he had a confident smirk on his face, even in the flickering firelight. It was him. Robert, Smiling Rob, Bennett. "Well now," Bennett said, his voice calm, almost cheerful. "This isn't the welcome I was expecting. Willa, darling, it seems you've made a mess." He raised one of his pistols, aiming it right at her. "Step away from the law, man, honey. We can still walk away from this." Willa didn't move. Her own gun was steady, pointed right at her husband's chest. "It's over, Rob. I'm not going with you." Bennett's smile tightened. "Don't be foolish. You and me, we're a team, and the boy needs his father." "He needs a father," she shot back. "Not a monster." Harlan saw his chance. While Bennett was focused on Willa, he was slowly, silently, pushing his rifle barrel over the edge of the table. He had a clear shot. But then Bennett did something clever. He took a step to the side, putting himself directly in line with Willa. If Harlan fired, he might hit her. It was a standoff. A husband, a wife, and the man she'd betrayed. "Last chance, Willa," Bennett said, his voice losing its charm, turning cold and flat. "Come here, now." "No." That one word hung in the air. Bennett's face changed. The smile vanished completely. "Then you can die with him." He cocked the hammer of his pistol. But in that split second, Harlan knew what he had to do. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, about the choice she had just made. He shoved the table forward, hard. It slid across the floor, crashing into Bennett's legs, throwing off his aim. His pistols fired, the bullets thudding harmlessly into the ceiling. At the same instant, Willa fired. Her shot was true. Bennett staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his shirt, then back at his wife. "Willa," he whispered. Then he collapsed. Outside, the fourth man, Cole, started firing blindly into the cabin. Harlan grabbed Willa, pulling her and the baby down behind the hearth. "Stay down," he ordered. He crawled to the side window, peered out, and saw Cole trying to make a run for the horses. Harlan took careful aim in the moonlight. He fired once. The man fell and didn't get up. Silence descended on the cabin. A thick, heavy silence, smelling of gunpowder and blood. Harlan got to his feet, his rifle ready. But there were no more threats. It was over. He turned and looked at Willa. She was huddled by the fire, rocking the crying baby, her body shaking uncontrollably. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and soot. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Harlan walked over to her. He looked down at the woman who had lied to him, who had led a gang of killers to his door, and who had, in the end, saved his life. He didn't see an outlaw. He saw a survivor. He reached down and gently took the pistol from her hand. Then he knelt in front of her. "It's all right," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "It's over." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for the anger, the hatred. But she didn't find it. What she found instead was something that looked almost like forgiveness. And in the ruins of the life she'd been forced to live, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to take root. He knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same. The quiet on his ridge was broken forever. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. They didn't talk much for the rest of the night. There was nothing left to say. Harlan dragged the bodies out of the cabin and into the barn. Willa cleaned the blood from the floorboards, her movements slow and mechanical. She calmed Tobias, fed him, and rocked him to sleep in the corner furthest from the broken window. When the sun came up, casting long, pale shadows across the valley, Harlan was sitting at the table, cleaning his rifle. Willa was standing by the newly boarded-up window, staring out at the trees. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet. Harlan finished wiping down the barrel of his rifle before he answered. "I ride to town. I tell Marshal Thompson what happened." She turned to face him, her expression bleak. "And me?" "You're a witness," he said simply. "You were a hostage. Bennett and his gang took you and your boy, forced you to help them. You played along until you had a chance to fight back. You saved my life." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "They'll never believe that." "They will," Harlan said, his gaze steady, "because that's the story I'm going to tell. And folks around here tend to believe me." He stood up and put on his coat. "You stay here. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back before nightfall." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. "Willa," she looked up, "the things you said about being done running, about wanting a different life for the boy. Did you mean it?" A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She nodded. "I meant it." He gave a slight nod of his own. "All right, then." And then he was gone. She spent the day in a daze. She patched clothes. She swept the floor. She tended to Tobias. She did all the things a normal woman would do on a normal day, but nothing felt normal. She felt like a ghost in someone else's life. Every time a branch snapped in the woods, she jumped. She kept expecting to see the law ride up, guns drawn, ready to take her away. She kept expecting to pay the price for her husband's sins. But when Harlan rode back up the trail just as the sun was setting, he was alone. He dismounted and walked onto the porch. He looked tired, down to the bone. "It's done," he said. "The marshal and his men took the bodies. He has my statement." "And," she whispered, "and he said he's glad there are still folks willing to stand up to men like Bennett. He called you brave." She couldn't speak. The relief was so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She just stood there in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. "The past is done, Willa," Harlan said, his voice gentle. "What you do now, that's up to you. You're free to go. To your cousin in Nebraska or anywhere else." He looked at her, and his eyes held a question he didn't dare ask out loud. She thought about the road, the cold, the hunger, the fear. She thought about a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. Then she looked around the small, rough cabin. She looked at the warm glow of the firelight through the door. She looked at this quiet, steady man who had seen the absolute worst of her and had chosen to see the best instead. "I'm not thinking about someplace else anymore," she said, her voice finding its strength. "I'm thinking about what needs fixing. Right here." A slow smile spread across Harlan Grady's face. It transformed him. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. "Well," he said, "I could use a hand fixing that chicken coop." He stepped inside the cabin, and for the first time, it felt like he wasn't just coming back to a shelter. He was coming home. The life they built wasn't easy. There were ghosts, and there were scars. But they built it together, board by board, day by day. They built a garden, they raised chickens, and they raised a boy who grew up knowing nothing but the safety of the quiet ridge. The silence was still there, but it was different now. It was a comfortable silence, filled not with loneliness, but with unspoken understanding. A love grown deep and rooted, as lasting as the land beneath them. This story shows that you can't always judge people by the storm they're caught in. Sometimes, the bravest choices are made when everything seems lost. If you were moved by Willa and Harlan's journey, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered in the next story.